glorious. No, the pure ones are monsters. I don't understand. How could you join the pure ones after what they did to us?
You don't know me at all.
So the Guardians of Ga'Hoole was released September 24th, 2010. Yes, you heard that right, 2010. Based off the book series Guardians of Ga'Hoole, it was directed by Zack Snyder, who is known mostly for his superhero movies, with this movie being his first entry into the animated movie world, and quickly becoming his last. With a budget of $80 million US, they were able to profit over $60 million with a box office total of $140.1 million. However, at the time of recording, this film was only able to amass a measly 52% Rotten Tomatoes score and a 63% audience score. This had many people scratching their heads. With such a revolutionary piece for animation and a seemingly captivating story such as this, what went wrong? Let's dive into this movie's plot and get a better understanding of what this film brought to the table. In a fictional world where talking owls take the place of humans, The Legend of the Guardians, the Owls Ga'Hoole follows the tale of two young Tidal Owls named Soren and his brother Clud. We quickly see that Soren idolizes warriors of the Owl Kingdom called the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, reenacting their famous battles to his younger sister Eglantine while his brother just cringes. But Soren draws particular attention to the lies of Keel, the supposed glorified leader of the Guardians who is powerful enough to rip the beak off their enemy's commander, who is now known as Metalbeak. Of course, these are just played off as just make-believe tales of the ages, and the Guardians are believed to only be a myth, and are just advised to sleep. But Clud makes the dashing proposal to attempt to partake in some night flying lessons, even though they can't quite fly yet. Now screwed at the bottom of the forest floor with no one to save them, they are first ambushed and then captured by two scouts of the so-called Pure Ones, who, might I add, should learn to shut up. They are then rounded up and brought to an outpost ran by the Pure Ones, who now make themselves very clear they believe in Tyto supremacy and is ran by this witch. Confused as abandoned owls, they are informed that they will be separated as either pickers or soldiers, but only Tytos get to have the privilege of becoming soldiers. As punishment for trying to be set free and defending a smaller owl named Gylfi, Soren is sent to become a picker while Clud is selected for soldier duty. It is here now we see the brothers travel down two vastly different paths. Soren, after learning that other picker owls are being moonblinked, whom to be honest doesn't look much different from today's society, are tasked to look for little bits of a powerful crystal which inhibits the owl's ability to move, or so they coined their gizzard. However, since Gylfi knew the Pure One's vile trap and warned Soren ahead of time, they avoided being moonblinked. Then they are quickly taken under the wing of Grimble, one of the guards who had been overseeing them the night before, secretly despising the Pure Ones who had taken his family when he was young and forced him to service. He reveals that the Guardians of Ga'Hoole are real, and are the only ones who would be able to stop the Pure One's reign of terror. And while he tries his best to enable Soren and Gylfi for their journey on such short notice, it doesn't take long for the witch Naira to find out what is going on, with Clud tagging along having returned from training. Now fully converted to the Pure One's antics and becoming loyal to their regime, he aids in Grimble's murder, but narrowly allowing Soren and Gylfi to escape in search of the Guardians. It doesn't take long for the Pure to realize that they are lost, and quickly run into the acquaintance of, yeah, I'm not saying that name, I'm just gonna call him Steve. Steve brings him back to his hollow, to where we meet his roommate Twilight, not to be confused with the movie, an American Idol reject who tries to break out in song every chance he gets. With their aid, they're able to reach the Sea of Hulamir, where they meet this thing whose whole point is to lead them in the general direction of the Guardians, but decides to go on about body parts and shit for too long. With this stretch of the journey the most treacherous, they encounter a blizzard in the middle of the ocean because that makes sense, and Steve becomes Frosty the Snowman.
I think. Goodbye.
But luckily, he's saved by a bird with a helmet, who we later learn is the Queen of the Guardians. Soren, now at the Ga'Hoole tree, tries to explain to the Guardians that the Pure Ones are mounting an attack of sorts with those crystals he had first-hand experience with, which everyone seems skeptical of, especially this owl, who believes Soren is full of shit. To which a feeble old owl in the background comes out and sides with Soren and tries to convince the king that true or not, they must investigate. Meanwhile, back at the Pure One's stone palace, Naira is impressed by Clud's loyalty loyalty and proceeds to fill his ego more to hopefully get more out of him. Clud, who is unaware of her manipulation, ends up capturing his own younger sister Eglantine and proceeds to moonblink her for pretty much no real reason at all other than to serve as a bridge for what happens next. Sent to investigate the Pure One's plans, Alomir and 2 others make it to the Stone Palace, and as they attempt to breach their security, it's revealed here that Alomir is a traitor to the Guardians, having been teased at the beginning of the movie in a meeting with Metalbeak, but their identity unknown. Back at the HOOLE tree, Soren and his feathered companions further their training, now considered new occupants to the tree, and as new occupants, they are required to learn different branches of skill sets called Chaws, and after an Owl City themed montage, good choice, we once again meet the old owl who stood up for Soren, who is known in the tree as Easelrib, a rib or teacher for their weather interpretation Chaw, and for his lesson he teaches Soren how to fly in slow motion. Although Soren failed his test, Easelrib summons Soren back to his hollow to tell him how impressed he was. Confused, Soren realizes what Easelrib was actually writing, and the mark present was consistent with that of the stories Soren had become fond of growing up, meaning that Easelrib had been the author. But he wasn't just the author. Easelrib reveals that he, in fact, was the Lies of Keel, which makes sense considering that Easel is just lies spelled backwards. Alomir then comes back to the HOOLE tree without his colleagues, but instead the paralyzed Eglantine, telling the Guardians that the Pure Ones, in fact, are up to no good. They then take immediate action to mobilize all of the Guardians to the Stone Palace, including Easelrib. While Soren wants to join, Easelrib advises it would be better to care for his sister and flies off to join the entourage. It's a good thing he did though, as once Soren's sister finally woke up from her trance, she informs Soren that the Guardians are heading into a trap and that Clud was the one who did this to her. Enlisting the help of his friends, who also stayed behind, they try to make their way back to the Stone Palace to warn the Guardians. But they are too late, having taken the bait set by Alomir. The Guardians are trapped using the crystals from earlier, but not if Soren could help it. With Twilight and Steve serving as a distraction for the bats and Gylfi existing, Soren is able to set the Guardians free by flying in slow motion again, this time through fire, and destroying the mechanism holding the Guardians in place. Confusing Soren and his friends as Guardians, Metalbeak kills off Alomir for not delivering all the Guardians to him. Good riddance. Now in full-blown fight mode, we get to see some of Zack Snyder's signature visual style as the Guardians and the Pure Ones brawl to the death. But Easelrib has other plans, engaging with Metalbeak in a supposed rematch to the battle that took Metalbeak's, well, beak to defeat him once and for all. In the chaos, Soren spots Clud and attempts to try and reason with him to stop siding with the Pure Ones, in a scene that almost exactly mirrors that infamous Star Wars scene.
It's over, Anakin!
Maybe this scene was inspired off this? After Clud tries to fool his own brother to try and kill him, he succumbs to instant karma and becomes dinner. Soren, believing that the Pure Ones are the ones to blame for his brother's death, decides to directly confront the leader, Metalbeak, narrowly saving his mentor, Easelrib, from almost certain defeat. But just as quickly as it started, Metalbeak is slain at Soren's hand by poking him with a stick. They hyped this guy for this long only for him to die in under a minute with little struggle. Great. Anyways, with Metalbeak's death, Naira and the rest of the Pure Ones decide to flee, meaning that Soren and the Guardians came out victorious and make the arrival back to the HOOLE tree with all the rescued owls. Soren's parents are there as well too, even though no one has told them where they were, as well as asked no questions about his own brother, but the movie ends with Soren and his companions being sworn in as new Guardians, not wearing the helmet, and Soren telling the story of his adventures to younglings. Let's start by reading some user reviews to gain some insight on where the problem lies. You really have to be into owls to fully enjoy this movie. Wrong. A visually engaging film that is quite engaging, said it twice, and colorful, but lacks any real emotional connection. This film highlights what many people criticize Zack Snyder for. It looks like he's got some haters. Lots of nice visuals, but not much else. Unfortunately, this dark children's story is overtly complex and confusing. Not one of Snyder's better efforts. Him and Michael Bay should get together then. But I don't know how this movie is confusing. Legends of the Guardians, The Owls of HOOLE isn't just a terrible title, it's also a terrible movie. They cram so many characters and backstory into the cliched fantasy plot that I was having a hard time keeping up, until I realized that I just didn't care. The animation couldn't hold my attention either. What a waste of talent. I'm sorry, if this animation couldn't hold your attention in the same year Incredible Bulk was released, what a waste of eyes. But this does raise the question, could the plot itself be the issue? Let's look at one more review. A boring, crammed adaptation of children's books that fails to capture any magic or wonder from its source material. And this review just opened Pandora's box. We now see two opposing sides. Those who claim that this film is unfaithful to the source material, and those who claim that the plot and characters themselves had uninteresting and boring characteristics that made the audience lose focus. And I can tell you for a fact that while neither of those points are necessarily right, they're not necessarily wrong either. Let's start out with what this film did right. The visuals, for one, are absolutely jaw-dropping. I might argue that this animation could certainly pass in the theater today and for many more years to come. If I asked someone who has never seen this movie before, they would say this movie was made in the past few years, not 2010. The characters also are another strong suit. Casting was not out of place, and each of their character arcs were extremely engaging, particularly with Soren and Clud. And this directly leads into my explanation for the best scene of this movie being when Clud officially turns on his own brother as an ally for the Pure Ones. This scene established the previously hinted diverging paths that the two brothers were heading by 3 words from Clud, in which its delivery gave me absolute chills to hear. Even though we as the audience were expecting this up to this point, it set up the real main conflict for this movie, not between the Pure Ones and the Guardians, but the internal struggle that Soren faces with his brother. As through the entire movie, he tries to win back his brother to the side of good, and when he finally gets the chance to confront him about it in the final fight, Clud uses his act of mercy to try and murder Soren, proving once and for all that he was loyal to the evil and jealousy that had consumed him. I want to give an honorable mention to the plot reveal with Isilrib being the Lies of Kiel. Being the owl that most of the Gahul tree looked down upon was also an interesting character arc that I feel like was sort of overlooked. The entire movie, Soren believed that the Lies of Kiel was this glorified warrior that was the king of the underdogs, and the reason he looked how he did was because realistically, battle is not glorious. Not beautiful, but merely doing what is right. Which honestly, this quote by Isilrib was an absolutely heart-wrenching thing to hear, but it was true. And although the scene in my opinion was not the best scene, it is certainly a close second. But now, this is what this film did wrong. Call me a broken record from the past few videos, but this ending was atrocious. I'd argue that after Clud perishes in the fight with Soren, this movie absolutely falls apart, and there's a valid reason why. The very fact that this is an adaptation to the book series, there were 16 books in this series, and quite frankly, fitting a storyline that spans this many books is a daunting task, but they also could have done it in a much better way than they actually did. The whole movie, the main antagonist, Metalbeak, was seen as an unstoppable force where even the mightiest of the Guardians could only rip off his beak. Even getting to the point where in the final rematch between Isilrib and Metalbeak, Isilrib is almost defeated. And then when Soren intervenes, Metalbeak just dies in the laziest way the writers could have thought of possible. And shortly after, the movie just ends. It almost feels like the movie didn't end because the story ended. It ended because they ran out of money. And it gets even worse. When reading the synopsis of all the books in the Guardians of Gahul book series, the main plotline of the movie only mirrors the first half of the first book, with the rest being entirely inspired or made up of spliced elements from book 2 and 3. And after taking a step back and seeing the plot from an all-encompassing point of view, you can really see the heartbreaking truth and why this film was doomed to fail from the plotline alone. While not confirmed, in my opinion, they never planned for a sequel to be made. It really seemed like the director just wanted to make this film to gain a bunch of money from all the loyal fans of the Guardians of Gahul book series, and then abruptly end the movie when it is no longer profitable for them to make, while also using bits and pieces from later events as a sign that they never seek to continue the storyline further down the road, and that the fans and the loyal audience has to stick with this one movie. So, while the side that claims that the uninteresting plot, and the side that claims that this film is unfaithful to the devout Gahul fans say that these are major reasons that this film was so poorly rated and didn't receive a sequel, aren't entirely correct, they aren't wrong either. It's just a little bit of both. The ending gives away clues of a much bigger problem. If you didn't know anything about Gahul when this movie came out, you would have been blown away by the visuals and the storytelling that this film had to offer, like myself, other than that rushed ending. But for those devout fans, they most definitely felt betrayed and used, as this almost certainly felt like a scheme to get their money and get out. However, we're here to talk about the movie itself. This movie, as a movie, ignoring the Gahul book series, because that's a whole different beast and I'm not a book channel, was amazing and probably had the most memorable characters and the greatest animation and storytelling I've ever seen. The thing that ruined it though was the botched ending. Since there's no future conflict that was really teased at the end, which most movies with sequels tend to do. They basically just threw a bunch of fanfiction prompts at the screen to hopefully appease the audience and then just ended the movie. It's almost like Zack Snyder and the producers made this movie knowing it would be doomed. Despite all this, I will give Guardians of Gahul my final rating score of a 7 out of 10. Hopefully, later down the road, they can take this botched excuse of an ending and turn it into something great, like a sequel. Hell, there's probably even millions of different ideas on fanfiction.com they can probably read through. But with that, thank you guys for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe. Is there any other movies you want to see me cover? And I'll see you all later.
Hold on! You better move that pussy wagon right now or I'm gonna...
You'll what?
I'm ready.